All right, well, welcome, listener, to the first episode of the EDH Takes podcast. I am Elijah Samuelson, and I'm here with my good friend, Spencer Cook.
Howdy.
And today we're going to talk about something that's long been near and dear to my heart when it comes to the EDH format, and that is the color combination of red and white. It's long been said that Boros isn't the most viable color combination. And Spencer, I think we have some disagreements with that, at least in the year of 2020.
Yeah, it's certainly
soon to be 2021.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's been a lot of complaints, and people continue to make those complaints, and we're just here to address some of the weaknesses and what we believe to be strengths of Boros in Commander.
Yeah, hopefully we can kind of lay out some of the deck building tips and stuff that people don't really get. They think that there's a lot of problems with Boros, and there are problems, but a lot of them are a little bit overblown.
Yeah, I think so. I think especially now, like they used to be big problems, like undeniably,
mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of that was maybe exacerbated by like just the way that people make Commander decks.
Yeah,
and how they see like what you're supposed to be doing in the format, like. Obviously, in a format where ramp and card advantage are probably the most important things, you could see how white and red might seem less than viable when those are probably the things that they struggle with the most.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's an interesting part of Magic that each color has its strengths and weaknesses. And I think that if you focus too much on ramping and drawing cards in Boros, that you can... It makes you play a lot of cards that aren't really that efficient, like stuff like Mind's Eye. Like obviously, like a green deck has weaknesses in like creature removal, but you won't see them playing like something like All Is Dust, or Scour from Existence.
Yeah,
just to exile a creature. But people play Mind's Eye or like less efficient card draw cards just because they think that's the most important thing to do.
Yeah, you really don't want to be doing that. You really want to try to lend yourself to the pros of the colors, as well as just playing better cards. I don't think you really want to play bad cards just to try to fit, like a niche that your colors can't really do. Like Mind's Eye is really not... I don't think that card ever is very good, honestly.
Yeah, like say you put 10 extra cards in your Boros deck to help you try and draw cards, but they're all like inefficient ways of doing it. You're just going to be like drawing cards that aren't good. Like why not just increase your overall card quality?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to talk about a lot of that later on in the show.
Yep.
But we're going to start off with some of the reasons like why people consider Boros to be bad. And the major thing is lack of card draw. And we believe that there's actually quite a few ways that you can achieve that in the colors.
Oh yeah, a lot. Or at the very least, card advantage, card draw, they all fall into the same category, I'd say.
Yeah, because, games are won with card advantage, not just card draw. And there's many ways to achieve that outside of just a spell that says, like, draw 3 cards.
Yep.
So we're going to start off, we're going to talk about, like, rummaging, wheels, impulse draw. Red actually has a lot of card draw, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially nowadays. Like, I don't think red has, like, people... can make that complaint, but like sure, it doesn't have the spell that just straight draws you cards, but it's got really efficient card advantage.
Mm-hmm. And it's all really cool because it's not trying to do the same thing as other colors. Red's pretty unique in the way that it draws cards, and I think people have, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, people are starting to realize that this is kind of just how red does it. And there's a lot of cards that aren't great, but there's a lot that are pretty permissible, and people are really starting to play those these days. So saying Boros can't draw cards, like, well, we agree that red can draw cards, so why can't Boros draw cards?
Yeah, exactly. It's a weird thing. Like it's not something. I don't think a color combination gets worse by
adding a color.
Like saying that like a red deck gets worse when you add white. That doesn't really make sense to me.
No.
And then speaking of white, now. I would agree that white has somewhat of a problem with card draw, but it has effects like land tax and weather wafer, like those land searching effects to get lands into your hand, which are a form of card draw. It doesn't necessarily get you like gas in hand like spells.
Yeah.
But especially in Boros, you can combine those effects with rummaging to like say activate a land tax and then have a card that, like Faithless Looting, you can rummage away those lands and get actual spells, so you're up cards in hand.
Yeah, and what the thing that like really lends that to be card advantage is that many of the cards, search for multiple lands, and if you combine that with looting, like when you even a card that's not even that great, like a Restless Explorer, can draw you 1, 2, 3 planes, and then that's if you loot them away, that's literally card draw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even like in say like a mono white deck, or in a Boros deck, even like you could have a 1-land hand with a Weathered Wafer and a land tax, and if you're not going first, you're probably going to be able to activate that, and then you just being able to keep more like gas in that opening hand is card advantage.
You have 7 cards in your hand for the first 5 turns of the game, unless you double spell, and then you have 6 cards in your hand. Like it's
yeah, I mean, in my opinion, in like especially less competitive games, I'll often keep a land tax over a 1-land hand with Soul Ring. Like I feel like 90%.
Yeah,
of
no,
the time.
all the time. Soul Ring.
That's my favorite opener.
Yeah. 1-land hand, land tax, 1 land or 2 lands with Weathered Wayfarer are very strong, I'd say.
And then, so combining those two things, I have what I call the 3 Rs of Boros. This is my cringe thing that I came up with. But the 3 Rs are rummaging, recursion, and revenge. So that mostly means pairing red's rummaging effects with white's recursion, or even red has recursion effects. You can achieve like a kind of card advantage while also often cheating mana costs. So say like red for recursion has stuff like, mostly for artifacts, in the form of like Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer, Scrap Mastery. Veldin is a really interesting card to in a way get creatures back from your graveyard, if only for a turn. But now we have the card Underworld Breach, which is probably one of the better recursion cards.
Yeah,
in the
that card's
format.
insane.
Arguably, maybe one of the better red cards in all of Commander.
For sure.
And white has a ton of recursion in the form of stuff like Sun Titan, Replenish, Emeria Shepherd, Savine's Reclamation, Karmic Guide, Revelark, Teshar, Loyal Retainers. It does it mostly for creatures or more specific things, but like it's a really expensive card. But since like we started playing on Magic Online, I've been playing Replenish, and like if you can like Faithless Looting, like some huge enchantments and like turn 3 or 4 play Replenish, like that's kind of like ramp, isn't it? Like
yeah, and you didn't even expend any like cards to do that. You didn't like have to use 3 cards. You pretty much just used 1.5 cards for the Faithless Looting is the half card. I guess.
Yeah, or like rummage away some huge legendary creature and then play Loyal Retainers, get it back for 3 mana. Like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and one of the most important things about this like recursion like style that Boros has access to is that these cards aren't. They're all just really good cards. Like, you're not putting, like, bad recursion cards in your deck to try to fit a theme. You're just playing cards that are good on their own that end up pairing well with other cards that are good on your own, cards that loot. So when you have, like, a Sun Titan or, like a Feldon, like, they're just very powerful cards that are never going to be bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you need rummaging or wheels to make recursion cards good. Like, your stuff's just going to die in a game of Commander, so you always want some of that, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so onto the next subject, we have the Recruiter Creatures, which by that we mean a creature that enters the battlefield and tutors up another card type. So that in itself is a 2-for-1. You get the creature on board and you get a card in your hand. And then if you can blink or recur that creature, you can repeat that effect to get more cards in hand, which is card advantage.
Yeah, and people will say that these don't really count as card advantage because there are several recruiters that are like 1/1s or 1/2s or whatever they are. But I mean, there are a solid number of recruiter creatures that are like reasonable power and toughness. Like what's the 3-mana 3/3? That searches for a 1-drop. That card like is
Ranger Captain.
Ranger Captain of Eos is like a really good body, and then he gets like a 1-drop where there's a lot of utility 1-drops you can play. Like Weathered Wayfarer is one of the best ones.
Yeah, there's this weird thing in Commander, I think, where people kind of like discount like a board presence as like not being card advantage. Like you play a card out and they're like, oh well, that 1/1 you have or that 2/2 doesn't really count for much because that's not how a lot of games are won. But you're still oftentimes able to use that creature if it's not for attacking, for like something like Skull Clamp or Sacrifice Outlets.
Your Recruiter the Guard gets Skull Clamped, or it holds a Sword of the Animist, and it's good.
Yeah, you have some value for having creatures on board, even if that's just attacking and blocking.
Get sacrificed to a Goblin Bombardment, ping something down. Creatures matter, so yeah.
And then on that same theme, we have stuff like good creatures to flicker, like Wall of Omens or Farsight Adept. Again, those like 2-for-1 creatures that, if you can just repeat that effect, you are able to get kind of like card draw out of that.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, look past Farsight Adept. I don't think I've seen many people play that card at all. That's the 3/3 from the recent set that draws... Zendikar Rising, that draws a card for you for 3 mana for 3/3, and it draws a card, and it draws a card for an opponent of your choice when it comes into play. Like, usually you can kind of maneuver a situation where drawing 1 card for an opponent is going to be not even, like, I wouldn't even say, like, not that bad. I'd say almost, like, neutral or slightly advantageous, because you can use it for political things, but other than that, like, having a 3/3 that draws a card when it enters in the Boros colors kind of just fits with what you want to be doing in the colors, hitting people and stuff like that, so...
Yeah, it helps you get that ahead on board without being, like, behind in your hand.
Yeah, and if you're not convinced, I'd recommend just to try the card out and see how it feels, because when you draw a hand, your opening hand, you see a Farsight Adept in your hand, you're going to be like, wow, this hand is suddenly keepable because I've got a body for my equipment, and I can, draw into more lands than I need to hit. So
yeah, and that's the big thing about card draw, is being able to hit your land drops, and that really helps you stay in the game.
Yeah.
And yeah, especially in a more casual setting, like, we don't like to play this way very often, but some people can use that, like, target player draws a card to their advantage, like, hey, you want to be my friend?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then one of my favorites for card draw on Boros is the Monarch mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think... arguably, Boros is the best color combination set up to take advantage of that. Very good in combat. White, I think, is a really good defensive color. And so you've got good cards like Palace Jailer, and now in Commander Legends, we just got a bunch more Monarch cards.
Yeah.
Like Archon of Coronation, or the Court Cycle.
Yeah.
But even just playing, like, the 4-mana 2/4 Palace Sentinels,
yeah,
that makes you the Monarch. Like, just getting the Monarch in the game... if you can hold on to that for a couple turns, or even always take it back by your end step, maybe occasionally your opponents will draw a couple cards off of it, and it will make people want to attack you. But it's always a good form of card advantage, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend Palace Jailer as a card to try out. That card has been, very powerful as a Monarch tool, but also just removing something. It's pretty good.
Yeah, Palace Jailer is often, like we were talking about with the Recruiter creatures being a 2-for-1, I feel like Palace Jailer is oftentimes a 3-for-1 because it enters, it's a 2/2, it exiles a creature your opponent controls, and then you draw a card on your end step.
Yeah, maybe more, so...
And especially, like, they get the creature back when they become the Monarch. So if you blink Palace Jailer, they're not getting the creature back when it leaves.
Yeah, and oftentimes people will put their commander, if you try to Palace Jailer their commander, they'll put it back in the command zone.
Yeah, because they don't want to have to wait until they can get the Monarch back. Like, sure, the Monarch, you have to be more careful about, like, when you put a Monarch card into play.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, like, even Palace Jailer, there's usually, especially, like, on turn 3 or 4, like, a decent board state where you can get some value off of that.
Yeah, and the new White Court is very good. I quite like that one.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, moving on, I guess we should probably talk about, some of the mana sinks that
yeah,
you can
even
do.
just, like, having a mana sink is a good way. It's not necessarily card draw or...
not really card advantage, but it is a way for you to do things in the game, even if you are running out of cards.
Yeah, it gives you game actions on board.
Yeah.
So stuff like Luminarch Ascension, I hate to say it's a new card because it's like almost a year old now, but Dawn of Hope.
Yeah.
Stuff like Eldrazi Displacer, or we put, it's a little different, but like Mirror Entity is a good way. Like if you just have a big board and you untap and you have like 1 or 2 cards in your hand, or you're top decking, it's just a good way to spend your mana for a turn.
For sure. You can, threaten a lot of damage on people. It's pretty nice.
And then we have creative card types, and by that we mean stuff like, more recently we've gotten the modal double face cards in Zendikar Rising, or the Adventure cards in Eldraine.
Yeah, and these just as cards to kind of add more value to your deck. Like, for example, the modal double face cards kind of are a little bit of card advantage because they're spells when you need them and they're lands when you don't. So they're pretty versatile, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say they're like you want to hit your land drops
for sure
in Boros, in my opinion. I mean, I think that's always good, no matter what kind of deck you're playing. But they let you play a higher land count without necessarily like taking gas away from your deck,
and I think
you don't get flooded so easily.
Yeah, I think the biggest upside to the modal double face cards is they let you keep a wider range of opening hands. So when you have an opening hand with 1 planes and 2 modal double face cards, if those were any other cards in your deck, you just have to mulligan that. But because they're the modal double face cards, you can play them as a land. Like they're just like really good in that situation. So yeah. I'd recommend them.
Oh, especially the mythic rare ones that can come in untapped. Like most like for just 3 life. Like you don't want to play too many tap lands in your deck, but it gives you a whole lot more.
Yeah, there's the white one that gives a creature protection, Sajiri, shelter. Yeah, that one's pretty good. The red little dude that kills an artifact, whatever that card's called. Card names are hard. But
the adventure card.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself already. Yeah.
But yeah, speaking of that, the adventure cards are like we were saying earlier. They're 2-for-1s.
Mm-hmm.
So you get like the what's he called? Embereth Shieldbreaker.
Yeah, Embereth Shieldbreaker.
That for 1 mana can destroy an artifact, and then for 2 mana is a 2/1, which doesn't seem like a huge deal.
Pretty unassuming.
It fills like that's the other nice thing about these adventure cards. They fill 2 spots on your curve.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just play them as a creature before the adventure part, but if you want to get more card advantage, you can do the adventure part.
Yeah.
We have like Giant Killer that can kill a power 4 greater creature, and later can just be like a creature tap downer.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem that great, but it's still like you kind of want that sometimes. You wouldn't just play that in your deck, but if it was also a kill spell, that's pretty decent. I kind of like Realm Cloak Giant. I'm trying that out now.
That card's cool.
5 mana board wipe with the upside of just being a big creature later. Like they're all pretty like mediocre creatures, but just like there's a lot of games I feel like where, especially later in, you might just want to be up like 1 big creature on your opponents. So something like Realm Cloak Giant could probably help you stay in the game.
Yeah, and so these are ways that you can leverage deck building to kind of add more card advantage per se to your deck. So, we've talked about some actual card draw things, but also just like this deck building that you can do to just make your deck like kind of feel like it has more card advantage.
Yeah, just have more things to do. Always good.
Yeah, and then we've got some miscellaneous like card draw things that don't really fit into a category, like Mangara the Diplomat, new card. That one's awesome.
Yeah, Mangara is a newer card that's I think an experiment in like a way to like start having white draw cards instead of like I think it was Ari Nia, the White Council of Colors representative, said something about it that was like, well, we figured in design a card that said opponents can't do this thing on a white card could be filled in the same space as like if your opponents do this thing, you get to draw a card. He thought that made sense, and I think that feels very white, and I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the flavor of that.
And then we also have Humbled Effector.
Yeah,
which is a really weird card. It's a 1 and a red. It's a 2/1, and you can tap it to draw 2 cards, and then target opponent gains control of Humbled Effector. So that seems like a kind of just like a weird like political card, like kind of a group hug card. But you can often like make the deal with somebody where you give them the Humbled Effector, and they have to for sure give it back to you. So it's just like it's kind of like Farsighted Adept, where it's just you and one other player going up cards on it.
Yeah.
Or there's other like weird tricky things you can do with it. Like you could activate your Humbled Effector, draw 2 cards, and then like sacrifice it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could use Homeward Path to tap and gain control of the Humbled Effector, and then you have an engine that lets you draw 2 cards every turn.
Yeah, things like you can bounce it, you can flicker it, you can Kiki Jiki to make a copy of it, and that gets
Oh yeah, Kiki Jiki
at the end,
make another Humbled Effector every turn.
It gets sacrificed at the end step. Yeah.
Yeah, tons of cool stuff.
Yeah, and I guess you have to do it on your turn. Humbled Effector can only be activated on your turn, just to...
Yeah,
but... Yeah, Humbled Effector is surprisingly good, and in my experience, you almost always... I would even say always can find someone at the table that is willing to give it back to you because they just want the 2 cards, and they don't really care that you're getting it back.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Most people will take that deal if somebody's like missing a land drop or just not getting enough gas. They'll be desperate enough to make that deal with you.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got the other kind of classic card draw cards in white that everyone talks about, like Mentor of the Meek and Bygone Bishop. And those are fine cards. Like, I don't mind them. They're okay.
Yeah, they're not super efficient, but they, especially if you're playing that strategy, like kind of White Weenie, like they'll let you draw cards.
Yeah.
And then we also put like Combustible Gear Hulk, which is an interesting card. It's a 6-mana 6/6 artifact creature in red that ETBs, and somebody can either have you mill 3 cards or have you draw 3 cards. And if they choose the mill option, they take damage equal to the combined converted mana cost of those cards. So if you're in like an aggressive strategy and you've got one person that you've been beating down on, especially if you have kind of a higher curve, they're often not going to want you to mill the 3 cards because sometimes it could just kill them or put them like way in the red zone.
They'll not want to take 10 when they could just give you your cards or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, or if you like just flicker and repeat that. Or if you're playing it with graveyard synergy too, where like if you mill 3 low CMC cards, that's just good for you.
Like we said with all the recursion, so yeah. It's a fuel for that. So yeah, I guess off of all of these things, I guess I would say that, you know, there's a decent amount of card draw in Boros colors. Like, wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, we had a lot of things to say. I think we actually had to stop ourselves before coming up with more stuff. But I feel like, yeah, card advantage, maybe in mono white, but between white and red, there's a lot of engines that you can create to keep drawing cards, and maybe they're not always very simple or as efficient as like blue or black or even green, but you can get card advantage.
Yeah, and none of this with playing Mind's Eye.
Yeah, don't play Mind's Eye.
Don't play Mind's Eye, please.
Yeah. Or Book of Ras.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to. It's not that bad.
But I guess, yeah, so another thing that people like to rag on Boros for is the lack of ramp. That's one of the big things that people complain about.
They keep saying it. They keep making like white cards that put lands into play and stuff. Like that exists in white. The other colors don't really have that, but people still say Boros needs ramp.
They say white is the worst color for ramping, and Boros is the worst color combination for ramping.
Yeah,
but it's really like probably closer to the middle in non-green colors.
Yeah, people don't say that about like blue and black constantly. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can achieve ramp in Boros. Mm-hmm. And the first thing, like you were saying, what's wrong with Mana Rocks?
Mana Rocks are very good. Green decks play Mana Rocks oftentimes, and that's the best color for ramping. So
not that we're necessarily talking about like competitive EDH. Like we don't play it. We play, I'd say, maybe like mid to like higher power sometimes.
If you were to use a number, probably like an 8 or so.
Yeah, and like even competitive commander decks will play some level of Mana Rocks just because Mana Rocks are often more efficient than land ramp and Mana Dorks.
Yeah, most land ramp and Mana Dorks don't produce mana the turn they come out. A lot of Mana Rocks, especially all the good 2 Mana Rocks, which of course we're gonna, they're probably the best ones you want to play, come into play on turn 3 or whatever and make a mana, and then you have 4 mana. So for that turn, because you play rambling a bit, but
Yeah, and obviously we know the thing about, like, well, people like to destroy Mana Rocks. People will play a Vandal Blast or Shattering Spree, stuff like that. But that's just the trade-off you get for them being so efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, just like every other color combination, Boros can play Mana Rocks, and they do, and it's good.
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference which Mana Rocks you're playing. Like, you really want to stick to, like, the lower CMC, like the 2-mana ones. Like,
yeah.
Maybe, like, you can go 3 mana, do some cool stuff with, like, Commander Sphere and a Sun Titan.
Yeah, and you can play, if you're looking to try to ramp into big things, you can play a couple of the larger Mana Rocks, but I really wouldn't play, like, a Gilded Lotus. I would stick to, maybe, like, a Worn Power Stone or, like, what's the 4-mana one that taps for 3?
I think understanding your mana curve is important when playing Mana Rocks, because if you're playing, like, those huge Mana Rocks, like, and you're not really using them to ramp into anything, they make way better targets for single target artifact destruction. I think that's what puts a lot of people off of Mana Rocks. But really, are people going out destroying your signets with their spot removal? It doesn't happen very often.
They're not. But, besides Mana Rocks, I mean, red and white, most specifically red, has a lot of ways to generate mana through, like, the combat steps. So cards like Neheb, Dreadhorde Champion, and Neheb the Eternal are both ways that, like, make a lot of mana just for attacking with a 4 mana cost creature.
Like Neheb, like, original Neheb the Eternal.
Yeah.
Like, you can play him out on, like, he's 5 mana.
He's 5, yeah.
But if you have a few creatures out, like we were talking earlier about, like, people not considering their creatures on board to, like, do much for them.
Yeah.
Like, you play out in Heb, and all of a sudden, if you can swing into somebody, he pays for himself, usually.
Yeah, I mean, if you just have, like, you know, a Farsight Adept and a Recruiter of the Guard or something, you know, that's enough damage to almost pay for himself, so...
And outside of those guys, this is obviously a card you can play in any color combination, but Sword of Feast and Famine...
Probably the best, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's probably the best equipment in any Boros deck, I would say.
And we'll talk more about this later, but Boros is very good, especially mono white, very good at tutoring equipments.
Yeah, for sure.
So you can more reliably have your Sword of Feast and Famine.
A lot of the games that you end up having Sword of Feast and Famine, you have more mana than the other players at the table.
Yeah.
So I guess Boros can't ramp, but you have more mana, so I don't know. But whatever. Of course, Dockside Extortionist is...
Yeah, we gave this one its own little section just because I used to think, like, when I would think about the weaknesses in my Boros decks, I was like, man, I don't really have, like, a card that just is crazy, like, ups you mana, like, so insanely. But then they made Dockside Extortionist, and now I feel like that's maybe the best one? Like,
it's kind of, like, one of the best, like, ramp pieces in the game.
Yeah, like,
for sure.
It's like, obviously you don't want to... It's not like an early game thing so much. Like, if you play it on turn 2, you're probably not getting up mana on it, but there's still games...
You can do that, yeah.
You can play it on turn 2, get 2 treasures, and then the next turn, you have 5 mana, right?
Yeah, and then you can just, you know, cast something way ahead of curve. Like, it's like and it comes to 1/2, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, oftentimes late game, Dockside Extortionist enters the battlefield, and you're making, like, 10 treasures off of it.
It's so crazy.
It just gives you what you need to end the game. Or early game, you can, like we said, just play it out, get a couple treasures, and hit something early.
And that's not even considering that you can blink it and recur it, like, to make even more mana. Often just go infinite.
Yeah, there's too many
infinite combos. Yeah.
Dockside Extortionist.
Unfortunately, the card's like $40, or $50, but you know.
Hopefully we see that reprinted within 2021.
Same with Sword of Feast and Famine, very expensive,
yeah.
But whatever. You don't have to play those ones. You can play ones.
They even freaking reprinted Sword of Feast and Famine this year, and it's still like $40.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, I guess, is that so rituals in Commander generally aren't very good. Like, some decks will play like a Dark Ritual. People generally won't play like Pyretic Ritual and stuff like that, but Red has access to some very powerful high impact rituals, which I think are very good in Commander. So cards like Jessica's Will and Mana Geyser are both you know, make upwards, you know, 6-7 mana, or in Mana Geyser's case make, like, you know, 20 mana, 15 mana, and they're not really ramp, but they are ways for you to have very explosive turns that will just kind of win you a game.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's I think, especially later in the game, a lot of turns where you're just like, man, if I just had a few more mana, and then you draw a ritual, and all of a sudden you're up so much mana. Like we were saying, like Jessica's Will, I think is usually going to up you about 4 mana. Mana Geyser, probably usually going to up you like 10 to 20 mana.
Yeah,
like,
it's crazy.
It can be really crazy. Like, especially people saying all the time, like, oh my god, green's out of... There's no way to keep them in check. They got so much land ramp. Well, wait for them to tap out, and then try playing a Mana Geyser. Like, just use that to your advantage.
You'll have you know, 14 mana in your main phase 1, and then you can kill them.
Yeah.
Usually that's enough to kill them.
It should be. You would hope. I mean,
I'd hope so.
I'm guilty of
dirtling around with some mana. Yeah.
But like in my Perforos Bronze-Blooded deck, that'll usually be enough mana to kill somebody.
Yeah. But yeah, so I wouldn't recommend, like I said, playing some of the smaller impact rituals, but the high impact ones will kind of win you the game when they go off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so not necessarily ramp, but we have land tax effects, which are often mistaken for ramp. Like, you see a lot of posts online of people being like, oh, well, I count land tax
as ramp,
Weather Wafer as my ramp cards, and it's I guess I can see how people just like see the land card on the card and they think it's ramp, but no, they put the land in your hands.
Ramp
so
really needs to put the land into play or make you mana more.
Yeah,
than just
if you have more
turn.
Mana than you should have from just playing your land for turn, that's ramp.
Yeah,
but just hitting your land for turn every turn is a big deal, because like if you play a ramp spell like a Mana Rock on a turn where you don't play your land, it didn't really ramp you, because if it's like turn 2 or turn 3 and you have 3 mana after you played a Signet on turn 2, you're not really, like, you didn't ramp there.
It's the same as just playing a land on turn 3 and not playing the mana rock.
Yeah, pretty much you paid mana to be at the amount of mana that you should be on your turn.
And that's why people play cards like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach in green, because they allow you to ramp and they get a land to your hands. You can keep playing your lands, because if you miss your land drops, not so good.
Yeah, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, they're always ramp on the turn you play them, but something like Rampant Growth or Farseek, not necessarily always ramp. I've seen plenty of people play those out, or a Mana Dork on a turn where they miss a land drop, and it's like, if you built your deck a little bit better, you probably wouldn't have that problem.
Yeah. But you're talking about, speaking of land tutoring, Boros is probably the best color combination outside of green to tutor non-basic lands with the card Weathered Wayfarer. It's really good that it tutors non-basic lands. It's kind of crazy, actually. And that lets you kind of tutor these lands that produce more than 1 mana, like Ancient Tomb and Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx.
Yeah, in my mono white deck, I have a whole 1-drop package based around Ranger Captain of Eos and Ranger of Eos, and Weathered Wayfarer searching up Nykthos is a huge way to ramp in that deck.
Yeah, and having creatures that tutor for your mana source lands, that's some good deck building is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll of value.
Yeah.
You get this one creature, gets the other thing, it gets the other thing, and you're not really drawing cards, but you're always getting into the next thing you're going to play.
And they're always replacing themselves, so it's you're not losing cards either. So yeah, besides Ancient Tomb and Nykthos, I guess you got Myriad Landscape and Terrain Generator as kind of the less powerful ones, but they still do the job. But yeah, for sure, Ancient Tomb and Nykthos are the best.
Yeah.
Especially when Weathered Wayfarer obviously already gives you the white mana symbols for the Nykthos. So.
Yeah, and Ancient Tomb and Nykthos, they're pretty monetarily expensive now, but we were saying about the mana rocks, and you can play those in any deck, but they're fragile. You can play an Ancient Tomb in any deck, and that doesn't have the problem as being fragile like a mana rock. People oftentimes don't have single target land removal, and people don't play a lot of mass land destruction. So you're pretty safe in playing that in party ramp package.
Yeah, and you don't need to always play Ancient Tomb, but I mean when you can tutor out of your deck and go from 3 to 5, instead of 3 to 4, just by playing a land, it's pretty powerful.
Or some people really hate the card, but if you're doing this thing where you're always hitting your land drops, I'd say you're pretty safe playing Temple of the False God.
You can definitely play that, yeah. But yeah, so yeah, for sure, there's a lot of ramp effects in Boros. I don't really know why people don't realize that, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's certainly as good as the other. I mean, there's some effects in blue that untap your permanents or just straight cheap mana costs. Maybe you could say they're a little better at it.
Sure.
But you can, especially in a more casual setting, you can achieve what you need to do in Boros. Ramp and card draw, problems in the past. I don't think that going into 2021 that you're going to have to worry about that so much.
Yeah. And of course, we didn't even mention, there's a lot of good white creatures that ramp. You have the 2/2 that gets you a plains when it comes into play, and the new 4-drop guy.
You got Knight of the White Orchid, Core Cartographer.
The
new Keeper of the
Accord. Very good.
And sure, a lot of those have that clause of your opponent has to have more lands than you do. But again, people are always saying green. There's so many green decks in the format. There's so many ramp decks. If somebody has 10 lands and it's turn 7 or something, you can just play those cards and then they're just going to ramp you most of the time.
Yeah, and 3 out of 4 games you're not going first. You just play them on turn 3 before you play your land, or whatever. Before you play your land on turn 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever the curve fits out for those, and you get a land.
Yeah, if you're playing, I've had this problem where if you're playing Boros and you play one of these effects, these white cards, it's you have. It only works if you have more lands than your opponent. That's a pretty good problem to have.
Yeah, if you have more lands than your opponent, you're doing all right.
Yeah, you're generally doing okay.
And your 2-mana 2/2 with First Strike is going to be just fine.
Yeah.
Without getting a land. For sure.
All right, so that's us refuting some of the main problems that people think Boros have.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about things more specifically why we think Boros is good and what it does have going on for it.
And they have some strengths. People will downplay their strengths, but they exist.
Oh yeah, I'd say there's a lot of strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we're gonna talk about creatures matter type of effects. Like I think Boros has this big ability to take advantage of creatures on board, like we were talking about earlier, just like having incremental like bodies. It has ways to kind of increase their value, and one of those is equipment. I think arguably you could say like other colors might be able to replicate like certain things Boros does, like aggro or control, and do it better. But I don't think anybody can argue that Boros isn't the best at using equipments, right?
Yeah, it's definitely like miles above every other color, with maybe the slightest exception of blue, but they're not even that. They're very bad at it. Like blue doesn't have good aggressive creatures.
Yeah, blue has the problem, like, it can tutor any kind of artifact and stuff, and it has some ways to, like, do aggro, but it doesn't have...
They don't have the creatures for it.
Yeah, it doesn't have as many of the payoffs for an aggro strategy, I feel like.
One thing I really like about Boros with the Creatures Matter theme is that, you know, a lot of other colors don't really care about, like, their bodies on their utility creatures. Like, you know, your random, like your Reclamation Sage, right? Like, they won't really care about the 2/1 body on it. But Boros kind of thrives off of, you know, the bodies that come with your utility creatures. So, for example, you know, you have cards like Durgar Hedgemage, which, you know, comes into play if you have a mountain.
If you have two or more planes, it destroys an enchantment. If you have 2 or more mountains, it destroys an artifact. So it can kind of be like a cool, like, 2-for-1 Rex Sage. Obviously, you have to build your mana base around it. Different.
But it's not it's more a spell than it is a creature. Like it's there to be some removal, and then it's like a 2/2, right? And then it just holds the sword and then swings in.
Yeah, or even things like Thraben Inspector that you're generally doing to like repeat and like draw the cards, like we were saying, like with Wall of Omens or Farsight Adept. They just hold equipment.
Yeah, I would put Thraben Inspector in a deck that doesn't really have many ways to blink it or recur it, just because it's a solid 1-drop that replaces itself with a clue, and then you can put an early Sword of Feast and Famine if you curve into it, or something like that. Very cool.
Yeah, like you were saying, I think a lot of green decks with like their Eternal Witness or their other utility creatures, they just play them, and then maybe they'll use them to block. Yeah, like that's what the body gets.
Like an Acidic Slime or something's just going to block something.
But we want to use them to attack.
Yeah. Yeah, so some of the good equipments that I'd recommend considering, you know, the very generic ones that most decks would be happy with were like Sword of Feast and Famine, of course. Skull Clamp is really good.
I think what Thraben Inspector's looking to investigate is why that person's life total is so high.
Very true. You could give Thraben Inspector a Mask of Memory as a way to draw and also fuel that looting theme. Sword of the Animus, everyone knows, is a really good ramp target. That, you know, that's one Sword of the Animus is even better when you have an early 1-drop or 2-drop, because you really want to get that going as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Of course, Lightning Greaves and Commander's Plate, a new card. You want to talk about that a little bit, Eli?
Oh, Commander's Plate?
Yeah, that card's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, I think it's maybe more specific to Voltron decks because of its interesting equip cost of like equip 3 to a commander, but it's like equip 5 to any other creature you control.
Yeah.
Which is steep, but like still giving +3/+3 and protection from, in Boros, what would be 3 colors, like that's a lot of value.
And the colors most people aren't playing.
And the notable thing, like Commander's Plate is 1 to cast.
Yeah, it's, oh my god, it's free pretty much.
In Boros decks, there's this thing where equipments usually don't cost mana to equip. Like you've got Pure Steel Paladin, you've got Sigarda's Aid.
Yeah.
There's ways to get around that.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
And one thing that's really nice is that these cards like Skull Clamp, Sword of the Animus, Feast and Famine, these aren't like equipment matter cards. You don't need to be playing an equipment deck to put these in your deck and have them be some of the best cards in your deck. These go in any Boros deck that has even the slightest of a creature theme.
Yeah, they just get you more damage on board or more card draw, more ramp.
Yeah.
Just all stuff that you want to do.
Their mana sinks later in the game if you need to. Just put a sword on something if you don't have anything else to do in your turn.
Yeah, or like Lightning Greaves. That's just gonna... Usually you've got at least one creature that you don't want to die.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
good thing to have. And Haste is a big deal. So speaking of that, we're going to move on to combat matters in Boros. So, Boros cards, obviously, they get... There's a lot of very powerful effects that, when combined with like just having those bodies in play, like Aurelia or Gisela.
Yeah.
Now we have Morag, Fury of Akum, that gives you the extra combat steps. Like if you just have a few creatures in play, and when you start getting these extra combats or these damage doublers, I think you put here how like your 2/2s and 3/3s can turn into like 20 plus damage pretty easily.
Just on curve for you playing your Aurelia or something. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, no. One of the really nice things about this is Boros, above other colors, really has a way to take advantage of their bodies, and you can kind of pick on players that are playing more of a low board impact things. Like if someone slams down a doubling season, you can punish them pretty hard with a lot of damage to where they're down to 20, 10 life, on the back foot for the rest of the game. Just by playing your creatures that are already good in your deck and doing good things, and then playing your big payoff. Like it's like you don't need to play like an overrun to like kill people. You just need to play these good cards like Gisela and Aurelia.
Yeah, just get in incremental damage throughout the game.
Yeah.
And I think, like you were saying, like with doubling season or something, a lot of decks are set up to be unstoppable in the late game, and you want to kind of change the game for those kind of decks and make them have to play around you a little bit. Like maybe they'll have to play out their commander or like some small creatures just to block you, and that will take them time that they usually don't have to worry about. Like it's good to make them like if they've got a board wipe, you want to make them use it now rather than later when it's really going to hose you.
And one of the nice things about these combat matter payoffs is that you're not even really when you slam down your Morag or your Gisela, you're not really losing any resources. You're just playing your big creature that is like still going to be on the board and still going to be good, and you're attacking with your other creatures that you've probably gotten value from already. And you still have them all after you've attacked someone to do it again next turn.
Yeah, like there's probably a place for extra combat spells, but you are kind of down a card the turn you play that, whereas like Aurelia is just going to be a 3/4 flying vigilance for you after that.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, Farsight Adept, a 3-mana 3/3 that draws a card for you and an opponent. You wouldn't think that'd be very good, but when you play a 3-mana 3/3 on turn 3, then later on in the game you play a Aurelia, that 3-mana 3/3 is doing 6 damage. Like and that's, you might not think that's a lot, but combined with the other creatures you have, the 2/2s and the 1/1s or whatever, it adds up.
Yeah, and then we talked about things like Mirror Entity earlier, which is a creature on board that also can just make your creatures huge later in the game.
Yeah.
So like Anthem creatures like that can be a nice thing to play. Or things that get extra value triggers off of attacking, like Atali or Sun Titan.
Taking a second combat with Aurelia is very powerful, those cards.
Yeah, just getting a couple extra combats with a Sun Titan can often, like we were talking about ramp, like can be used to get a couple lands back from your graveyard to play. Or just like get some of your creatures that died earlier off. It's a big deal.
So most Boros decks do want to be taking advantage of some of these Boros powerhouses, like Aurelia and Gisela.
And then another thing that Boros can do pretty well, we talked a little bit about this in the when we were talking about like the
card draw
and Farsight Adept, but white is really good at flickering stuff, and red has a lot of effects that are like make a token
copy
of a creature, like Kiki Jiki, or there's a Twin Flame, like spells that do it and stuff like that.
A lot of those cards
that can help you re-trigger those enter the battlefield effects. Get additional value.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's really good to have creatures on board as a Boros deck, for sure.
And then we've got Planeswalkers.
Not something people usually think of when you think of Boros, but
you don't see like not necessarily that it would be like a Boros Super Friends deck that we're talking about, but people usually kind of like to crap on Planeswalkers in Commander. Like they always say, like, you're going to play this out, and then it's just going to get killed right away. And sometimes that is the case. It's like the Monarch. You have to be careful when you play them. But I think, like, Boros deck, like, you can... Usually you've got somebody... if you're playing aggressive, you either got somebody on the back foot, and they can't, like, afford to send their creatures back at you. Mm-hmm. Or you'll just have, a good board to defend a Planeswalker.
Yeah, and, like, there are a surprising chunk of Planeswalkers in Boros that are pretty good. Like, one of the best ones, I would say, Elspeth Sun's Champion. A lot of people know this card. It's really good. You've got cards like Duretti, Scrap Savant. You've got, some of the colorless ones like Ugins and, the Karns of the world. They're all really good.
Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Acts as both ramp and card advantage. She has Impulse Draw, and she adds mana. Yeah. That's big. I like Chandra Flamecaller. She lets you do a kind of a wheel for yourself where you discard your hand and then draw that many cards +1, so that is upping you cards. Or she can do a damage-based board wipe. You got Gideon Jura or like Nahiri the Harbinger that can be used for removal right away.
Man. Nahiri is such a good pair with land tax. You play a land tax on turn 1, start drawing a bunch of lands, then you Nahiri and draw 2 and discard 2.
Yeah, she has Rummaging built onto her. And Nahiri the Harbinger, she ultimates a lot faster than you'd expect.
She ultimates in like 3 turns.
Yeah, she ultimates the 3rd turn, she's out.
Yeah.
And her ult isn't necessarily game-ending, but tutoring any creature or artifact into play and giving it haste for a turn.
Yeah.
That's pretty big.
Even in a deck where you're not even playing a bunch of big creatures, you just tutor up your Inferno Titan or something, or a Sun Titan, and then you get the 2 triggers immediately because it gives it haste.
What I like to do in my Feather deck, if I ultimate a Nahiri and have a Plains in play, you go and get a Myriad Shepherd, you play your Plains, and you get your Nahiri back right away.
Yeah, very cool.
So you're not really like down the Nahiri even.
Yeah. So yeah, Planeswalkers, one of the best colors to take advantage of Planeswalkers, I'd say. Maybe blue has a shot for that, green with like the doubling season effects, but yeah, definitely white and red, one of the best colors to defend them.
You can use them they produce incremental value for you. You can use them to get some more of your card draw, like with Karn Scion of Urza, he kind of draws you a card every turn.
Yeah.
And then also makes bodies, so it's 2 things you want to do.
The 6-mana Ugin too.
You got the new 6-mana Ugin for more of the Spark that makes those 2/2s that kind of draw you a card. He makes your artifacts cost less, so there you have rampant card draw, and he does removal too.
Yeah, it's really good.
A lot of things that you want.
Yeah. So besides Planeswalkers, another thing that white, mostly white, but white and red does well is Stax effects and resource mitigation. I know some Stax is a little bit of a touchy subject,
taboo.
Yeah, but like we're not in blue. We're not playing Stasis.
Yeah, we're not monsters.
We're not talking about Tangle Wire. We're talking about good, appropriate Stax cards like Hate Bears and
good Christian Stax pieces.
Some graveyard hate like Rest in Peace. Things that you're getting a little bit. I mean, you might get some groans when you slam down a Blood Moon, but that those are good cards.
They shouldn't be playing so many non-basic lands.
That's true. Basics are good. Play more basics.
The amazing basic land.
Yeah, exactly. Future episode coming soon. But yeah, you get a lot of really powerful white effects like Aven Mind Sensor, Leonin Arbiter, Grand Abolisher. Grand Abolisher is like kind of just hoses a lot of decks trying to do things on your turn. It lets you like go crazy. Yeah. Some of the other, like Spirit of the Labyrinth, and Hushbringer, Draneth Magistrate making big waves in CEDH and casual tables alike.
Yeah, and people like to poop on it a little bit, but Alms Collector, I think, is better than people think, because sure, it doesn't stop a lot of the card draw that you want it to.
Yeah.
But I feel like especially in green decks, they kind of like dump their hand out and then go to have this one turn, or like blue decks with like a Windfall. They dump their hand out and they go to have this turn where they play the one big spell to kind of reload.
Yeah.
And if you flash in Alms Collector in response to that, not only do you get a card off of that, so that's card draw for you, but it stops them from like reloading their hand.
Yeah, some of the ways that games kind of break open is when players will do that big reload turn. Like a green deck will play their
Rish Cards
Expertise and draw 9 cards, and you're just and then if that gets countered or stopped, they often have 2 cards in their hand or something. The color that's supposed to be able to draw cards the best. Well, I don't know.
I think my best Alms Collector was one time somebody went to play a Brainstorm, and I flashed an Alms Collector in response to it, and he had to use his Cyclonic Rift on my Alms Collector to stop himself from just like losing the last 2 cards in his hand.
To stop himself from going -3.
Yeah, because you draw 1 and then put 2 back.
Oh my god. And he had to play the Brainstorm.
Or Alms Collector into Greater Good is also awesome. They go to sack their creature, draw a bunch of cards. They draw 1 card and discard 3.
Yep.
Good times.
Yeah. And they can't even really sacrifice things in response. Like if they sack a creature to Greater Good, then you flash in Alms Collector, and they have another medium-sized creature. If they sacrifice that in response, they still have to discard the 3 cards at the end. So they'll still have to discard all their cards before they get to cast their sorceries and creatures.
Yeah. Pretty cool card.
Yeah, not
maybe every deck, but it's got places. And in Boros, you can pair that with your own wheel.
Yeah.
If you have an Alms Collector out, you flash in on then step and go to wheel. All of a sudden, you've got 10 cards in your hand. Each opponent has 1.
Yeah. Cards also you have cards like Kataki and Harsh Mentor and Linvala. It's just like some miscellaneous cards that are reasonable on their own, and they can get you some incremental in the along the lines of Kataki, just getting their mana, making them spend a little more mana, and Harshmentor doing some damage.
Yeah, and it's not like they are necessarily like big card advantage for you, but say you play like a Rest in Peace and your opponent's looking at their hand that has 3 reanimation cards in it. You just shut off like a bunch of cards in their hand, and you're making their cards effectively useless.
And like 90% of commander decks do stuff with their graveyard. Like it's very rare that you have to specifically build your deck to not use the graveyard. I think more often than not, if you don't want to,
Yeah, I feel like there's always like a little bit like everyone has like 1 or 2 cards in their deck that probably references.
Most green decks will play an Eternal Witness. Most black decks should play a Reanimate. Most Reanimate on its own. Blue decks will sometimes play like Archaeomancer type things.
Yeah, I think that's the source of a lot of degeneracy in commanders. People looping the same
their recursion,
stuff.
Yeah, and then you just shut it all off. And I guess I know we're talking about this for a while, but I want to mention that you can play Rest in Peace in your deck that has graveyard recursion in it. You don't need to feel like you can't put your Sun Titan in your deck with your Rest in Peace. You can play them. It's fine.
Yeah, that's something I usually try and avoid, like, if I have too much reanimation doing stuff like that, but you're right, like, some of it's just so good that you can hate yourself out a little bit. I've seen a lot of white decks, though, when they try and do this kind of Stax plan, they play just such a glut of, like, Hate Bear and Stax cards that they kind of do hate themselves out just as much. Like, playing Rule of Law against a blue deck, when they're better set up to play 1 spell on each turn, rather than you just playing 1 for your turn and then passing. There's some effects that they can get around.
Yeah, and so the way that I see these Hate Bear cards is they're kind of cards that you can just kind of sprinkle into your deck because you know that you care about creatures, and then they're gonna hurt your opponents, and you're gonna be able to put swords on them and like get the damage off of them. And when they don't hurt your opponents, they're still creatures. Like they still do what you want to do.
Yep, baseline creature always attacks or blocks. I'm always a big fan.
Yeah, so just if you're building a deck that wants to be even a little aggressive or do a little bit of combat, just take a look at all the Hate Bears and then decide if any of them are right for what your curve or what you want to be doing.
So we talked a lot about aggro, but what about when you're on the defense? You might want to play, as every deck should, some removal and board wipes, which we think white and red has some of the best.
Yeah, not even like top 1, top 2 color combinations for removal and board wipes for sure. Maybe like black has a little bit better things. You have Cyclonic Rift, but when you have such efficient and ubiquitous effects in blue, like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, like these are some of the most efficient removal spells in all of Commander, the entire format. And every white deck, like their auto includes in every white deck.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think especially swords.
Mostly
like,
swords.
There's like never much of a downside for having a swords. Like I would maybe tell people not to play too much single target removal, because oftentimes it kind of is card disadvantage. Like if you 1-for-1 remove an opponent's thing, then your other 2 opponents are they're fine. Like they didn't lose anything, and you just spent your card to deal with a resource. But you still need to play some of that because you're going to have problems in a game of Commander that you need to deal with.
But for your selection of single target removal that you do play, white and red have a lot of really good choices. Like I know this one not talked about very often, but you have the red card Volcanic Offering, which is a 5-mana instant. It does 7 damage to a creature you don't control and destroys a land you don't control. And then an opponent gets to choose 7 damage to a creature you don't control, and also
another non-basic land.
And it's an instant too.
Yeah, so that's a 4-for-1. I mean, like maybe there's a situation where one of your opponents that you choose is just like a dick and decides to destroy somebody's like token, but they're always going to have to destroy the land. You always get 2 things of your choice.
Yeah, and usually they're not going to just like target the same thing you did. Like that's usually they'll take the hurting the other person.
They can do that.
They can, but why would they? Right? Like they could hurt someone else again.
Yeah, and they should. I think most people should have that mentality somewhat of like, my opponents are all my opponents.
Yeah, unless like you are like arch enemy at that moment.
Yeah, unless you need to be stopped for sure.
But like usually, if that's the case, you're fine. But other cards like some of the best ubiquitous removal spells, Generous Gift is very powerful, hits everything in white. Mm-hmm. So that's really nice. You probably don't want to be playing cards like Lightning Bolt or Gut Shot in your deck, but
no, I'm afraid of Gut
but
Shot.
you have got Chaos Warp is all right, and You know, a lot of single target removal for artifacts and enchantments.
You even get some card, like some removal that does hit multiple targets, like Crush Contraband, or now we have Heliod's Intervention, which is a sweet card.
Oh, and also white and red have so many creatures that come in and destroy something. Like, you know, the new was the Skyclave Apparition. Yeah.
Or we talking about Palace Jailer earlier?
Yeah. Even just like a Flame Tongue Kavu, which enters the battlefield and hits something, does 4 damage to something. Like,
it's decent.
Look at a commander table. You know, more than half the creatures are going to be killed by a 4 damage. So yeah.
Yeah, but then board wipes too are a big deal, because if you are in that game where you're on the back foot or you're behind on card advantage or behind on board and you've been having a rough go of it, using your one card to destroy your opponent's collective board states can be a huge like card advantage or like tempo swing.
Yeah, and probably I would say maybe besides with the possible exception of like, you know, Cyclonic Rift and Toxic Deluge as being like, you know, either really powerful or really efficient, Blasphemous Act has got to be one of the best board wipes in the entire format. It being often 1 mana to kill every creature in play. At worst case, like 4 mana.
I feel like I've paid more than 1 mana for Blasphemous Act, like maybe 10 times.
It's crazy how efficient that card is.
Yeah, that card, probably the best board wipe. But even like white has some really like versatile or like not always the most mana efficient, but it's got board wipes that can hit more than just creatures in the form of like Hour of Revelation. That's the 3 in white, and it costs 3 generic less if there are more than 10 non-land permanents on the board. So often it's just white, and it destroys all non-land permanents.
Mm-hmm. You have obviously Austere Command as kind of a staple that is very versatile.
Oh yeah, Austere Command. Austere Command usually feels like a one-sided board wipe.
Yeah, usually you can position yourself so you don't really hurt yourself that badly with it. Mm-hmm.
Like if you're playing that deck where you have just like a lot of low-to-the-ground creatures and maybe some artifacts, like not that many enchantments, and you play that like destroy all big creatures and enchantments, I feel like that hurts like a lot of green decks a lot.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Also, Tragic Arrogance, one of the best white board wipes for sure, as you know, often just like back-breaking for every opponent you have. Like, you get to choose what they keep.
Because it's like everyone, in theory, should get the same amount of stuff, but you're like, no, you get to keep your token for your creature, your worst mana, or say you've got like an artifact land or something. You're like, you keep your artifact land, you sack all your mana rocks.
You know that token that's also an artifact? You get that as your artifact too, and your creature.
Meanwhile, I'm going to keep my Gisela, my Planeswalker, my Soul Ring,
my Sword of Feast and Famine. Maybe, you know, my...
just being able to keep around, like, your best stuff and they all get their worst stuff.
Yeah.
It should usually do some work.
For sure.
Or you have Winds of Abandon now.
Mm-hmm. That's double, if it's double duty.
Yeah, it can be a 2 mana sorcery speed path, or 6 mana, like, later in the game. Like, it's kind of a weird card where you maybe don't want to do it all the time because it does give them basic lands from their deck. But if like you need to swing through for a final attack, or if you're just going to die anyways, like 6 mana to exile each creature your opponents control. That's big.
Yeah, it's often what Winds of Abandon does is it's kill an opponent's creatures and then kill one of them, so that the mana that you're giving them isn't as important because you're using it as an opportunity to literally kill them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my new favorites.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, another thing that Boros has going for it.
Yeah, back to aggro. People like to say, you know, the thing about like oh, Boros decks, they're all aggro decks. That's boring. It's like, well, no, is it really boring? Because how many aggro decks do you really see in Commander?
People really don't play aggro very much, so I think it's a breath of fresh air when you have someone doing something really aggressive and not necessarily all in. You don't have to go all in to be aggressive.
Yeah, what's really wrong with aggro? Like, some people like aggro. I think it's fun.
Yeah. And there's definitely a place for, you know, aggro in between, you know, mid-range control. It all kind of... But even the thing with Boros is that even your mid-range and control decks probably have aggro elements to them, unless they're strictly combo. Like, for one thing that most aggro decks will want is Haste. And we all know that Haste is probably the best evergreen keyword in Commander. And red is the color that does Haste the best by far.
Yeah, Haste is extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to always like use your creatures the turn you play them, it kind of removes the ability of your opponents to react to you at sorcery speed. shuts off a lot of like problems from board wipes if you're just able to get your value the turn you play the creature.
Yeah, and I would say it kind of fixes a lot of the... I mean, you don't need to have like mass haste for your whole team to like play the game, but a lot of Boros decks are very happy if they get to play their Sun Titan and attack with their Sun Titan and then get all their value right away and hit someone for 6. It's awesome.
Yeah, stuff like those attack triggers and getting them right away.
Yeah.
Big.
And there's some pretty good, maybe even worse ones, but there's some solid haste, anthem effects like anger. You don't even have to cast it; just if it's in your graveyard, your creatures get, and you have a mountain. Your creatures get haste. You can play fervor, I guess. It's just the enchantment, hammer Perforos, stuff like that. Perforos the bronze blooded.
Yeah, like say you're playing that game where you're beating somebody down with aggro, and they have that turn where they go and board wipe you. Generally pretty bad for you as the aggro deck, but if you have like one of those enchantments in play that gives all your creatures haste, or you have a lightning greaves in play, they can't really feel totally safe because it's like you could just recast your commander, put greaves on it, and swing back into them again.
Yeah, and yeah, so a couple other cards that you can play. You can play Urabrask, the Hidden. He's really good. He makes your opponent's things enter tapped. We talked about before, and this is all red, but we talked about before about how one of the best things that white can do is it can tutor lands very well, specific lands with Weathered Wayfarer. And there's a lot of good lands that give haste to individual creatures, like Hall of the Bandit Lord. I don't know if I like that one as much, but you have like Flamekin Village, Slayer's Stronghold, Hanwar Battlements, and they're very good. I think it's very good to include at least one haste utility land in aggressive Boros decks, because a lot of times people will forget about it, but just being able to play a very large creature in the late game and then hit someone for 14 with like a Gisela or something.
Yeah, like it doesn't really cost you anything in deck building. Like you just replace a land slot.
Yeah.
Sure, like Flamekin Village usually enters tap, but it taps for red. But like Hanwar Battlements and Slayer's Stronghold enter the battlefield untapped.
Yeah.
They tap for colorless mana, but then like Hall of the Bandit Lord,
too, untapped, right?
I think it enters tapped.
Okay.
Taps for colorless, and you have to lose 3 life when you use it. But still, they're just lands. Like just replace your lands.
Yeah. One card that I want to talk about that I think I haven't seen anyone play is Hate Mirage. It's a new card from Commander 2019 or 18. It was in I think it was 2019, right? Hate Mirage?
Yeah,
2018?
yeah, 2019.
2019. Yeah. This is a 4 mana cost sorcery, I believe, that creates 2 token copies of creatures you don't control. So, and then they get haste, and then you have to sacrifice them or exile them at the end step. Mm-hmm. This card, it's so versatile that it's usually either more than like 10 damage in attackers, or like 7 damage in attackers, plus someone's really good ETB creature, or someone's like Anthem or something, anything crazy. Like people have crazy cards on board. Sometimes you even like copy a mana double creature and like you make mana. It's like a source of ramp or whatever. So Hate Mirage, I think, is really underutilized. I'd recommend trying it out. Just think of, like, look at turn 7 on a commander game and look at a board and be like, if I could have 2 creatures my opponent's control for this turn,
the 2 best creatures.
What's the worst case? Like 10 damage and like drawing a card? Like it's really good.
Yeah, and I think that's another notable thing about like haste. Like you could have an empty board state and like people just feel pretty safe against that. But then if you get like creatures that have like natural haste, or like throw out a haste anthem or equipment or something, like you can get people kind of when they got their pants down.
You can make a copy of an Eldrazi and then kill somebody. Like it does that, and you get 2. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, haste is awesome.
Yeah.
And then we've got a few direct damage effects, which generally you don't want to play like too many just like straight burn cards in Commander, but there are really efficient versions of it.
Yeah.
Like Perforos, Scout at the Forge. Creature ETBs deal 2 damage to each opponent. That adds up fast. Like if you see a Perforos, usually it means you're in trouble.
I would, Perforos is probably one of the cards that people die to the most in Commander, honestly.
Yeah, like Perforos allows you to kind of like get a win with an aggro deck without like even needing to attack. Like if you're locked down by like ghostly prisons and stuff, you're just like, oh, I'll just play my creatures and they'll deal 2 damage right away.
And that's ignoring the mode of Perforos where he's a 5/6 or something, and
he becomes a 6/5,
6/5, and he pumps your team.
Yeah, and he has an anthem. He's just like the all-purpose like aggro creature in my opinion.
Yeah. And other than Perforos, you've got other burn cards that are
Baby Perforos.
Baby Perforos, Impact Tremors, of course. Not it'll go in your Goblin decks and stuff dumb like that. But
yeah, for 2 mana, dealing 1 damage on a creature ETB, it's decent.
But I guess more high impact versions of that, you have Warstorm Surge and the new Dragon Terror of the Peaks.
Yeah, that deal damage equal to a creature's power when it enters the battlefield.
And like, you might think, oh, it's it's like a must remove card, like a Terror of the Peaks. Like, everyone knows you're going to die to a Terror of the Peaks, but they can't kill everything you do. Every once in a while, your Terror of the Peaks will stick around, and then next turn you play your Hate Mirage and deal 20 to someone,
Yeah, like the dies to removal argument, I think, is always kind of bad, because if you build your deck with enough card advantage and like enough 2-for-1s and stuff, like you can play that game where you play something out, they go to remove it, and if your deck is built well enough, you're going to win that battle of attrition eventually.
Yeah.
Not everything's going to get removed. Something's going to stick.
Mm-hmm.
And Terror of the Peaks and Warstorm Surge notably can also hit creatures with their damage.
Yeah, usually they are hitting creatures until you're trying to end the game. So
yeah, you just knock blockers out of the way or kill their commander.
Yeah.
And then we got like Goblin Bombardment, which is a good sack outlet.
Yeah.
A lot of decks want to play sack outlets.
One of the probably the best sack outlet in the colors, besides like the altars or whatever. But
yeah, I think so. Yeah, because again, that one can hit creatures. So oftentimes, like I'm using a Goblin Bombardment to like kill people's mana dorks.
Oftentimes,
commander.
Yeah, you're not really scared of a Goblin Bombardment as much in a lot of times people aren't scared about Goblin Bombardment in like an aggro deck, because they're like, oh, they're playing their creatures. Why would they want to sack them? Like, they're trying to attack me, and then they play like a Academy Rector or something, and then you're like, oh crap,
yeah.
I didn't realize that was going to happen.
Or other direct damage effects. We got like Price of Progress. I think as far as like direct burn cards for Commander, Price of Progress is probably the best one, right?
Yeah, it probably ends up doing the most for the least mana.
Like if somebody has 5 non-basic lands in play, that's dealing 10 damage to them.
It's a lot. Like
2 mana.
That, if your strategy is trying to kill people with damage, like the reach will be helpful.
Again, like people always complain about green and stuff, like, well, what do we do about green? Well, say you're playing against a green and X deck, maybe not mono green, it wouldn't work the best against, but if they're playing like a Sultai deck and they've got their Field of the Dead going off and everything, they got all these lands, you go Price of Progress.
Take 16!
it could deal 20 damage to them, like, no joke.
Yeah. And then you also have a couple other really, really like high damage single cards that do a lot of damage, like Chandra's Ignition and like Earthquakes and stuff, where you can, if you just have that turn where you play your Mana Geyser and make 20 mana, you can just kind of kill people or deal half their life total or whatever, Mm-hmm. Same with, I guess you could play like Heartless Hitotsugu. And...
Yeah, Heartless Hitotsugu, probably, as far as like just damage dealing cards, probably at the top. I mean, it's kind of it's very fair, because he does it to everybody.
Yeah.
So
as you
be
should.
Careful. I mean, like, if you want to really even things out, if you want to make things more fair, make everybody be at 20 life, and then see how that game goes.
Yeah, like a normal game.
Or I used to play that with Gisela. That's pretty cool.
That kills everyone.
Because then if they're at an even life total, he'll kill all your opponents, and you should live, because you take half damage with Gisela.
Yeah, so you only take a quarter of your life total, but yeah.
But speaking of that, that's kind of a combo.
It is a combo.
And you can do some combos in Boros.
People will say, that Boros really doesn't have ways to end games. Like, people just think Boros can only hit people with creatures. But there's a lot of really good combos in Boros. And most of them are playing a good card and pairing it with another good card. Whereas in other colors, like, you're doing 2-card combos, 3-card combos with cards that really do nothing on their own.
Yeah.
So yeah, some of the best combos. Obviously, when people recognize the most is Kiki Jiki and insert.
The combo machine.
Yeah.
Kiki Jiki.
Zealous Conscripts, Restoration Angel. Any of those cards. There's a lot of them. There's like 5 or 6 of them. You have Combat Celebrant, Village Bellringer, Felidar Guardian. There's a lot.
Yeah, but again, like you were saying, a lot of those cards like Kiki Jiki, Felidar, Restoration Angel, those help you get card advantage earlier in the game with like your blink themes or just like repeating your ETBs.
Yeah, Kiki Jiki is not just a win con; he is also a very good value engine or even damage engine for like attacking with a big haste creature.
Oh my god! One game I had just like a bunch of equipments and no other creatures. I played Kiki Jiki. Just put equipments on him. And he's a 2/2 with haste. That's where it was in that game.
Oh my god. I had a game where I was losing in a Boros deck I was playing the whole game. Then my opponent played an intruder alarm, and then I went to my turn and I won because I played Kiki Jiki. And I just won. It was very nice. But yeah, besides Kiki Jiki, you have Godo as a Godo bandit, and he's a 1-card combo because he tutors up Helm of the Host and goes infinite. You need a little mana for it.
Yeah,
but...
Godo Helm, Aurelia and Helm, also really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, Godo and Aurelia also just good cards on their own. Helm of the Host, it's a card that people will kill because they're aware of their reputation.
They know,
But if you can get one creature off of a Helm of the Host, I put it on a Sun Titan or something.
It does a job.
That's still good. It's a lot of mana to equip, but like we said earlier, Boros equip costs are usually 0.
They're usually 0.
You got Hammer of Nazan,
yeah,
Pure Steel Paladin, stuff like that.
And even when they're not 0, I hope you're not playing the ones that cost 9 to equip, 8 to equip. Yeah, but whatever. But besides the Godo thing, you also have the infinite mana kind of things like Aggravated Assault with Sword of Feast and Famine or Neheb, where you just get some sort of mana off of hitting somebody or attacking, and then you use that mana into Aggravated Assault to get another combat.
You're able to pay the 5 to get the extra combat.
So you get infinite mana, infinite combats. I think that works with there's a couple other cards that works with as well, but just those are probably your best ones.
And then we got my personal combo deck in Boros is Gerard Weatherlight Hero, which early on in spoiler season, people realized that it comboed with the card Loyal Retainers and a Sack Outlet. Loyal Retainers is a 3-mana 1/1 that you can sacrifice and return a legendary creature from your graveyard to play, but activate only before combat.
Mm-hmm.
So that with Gerard, when he dies, he has a triggered ability that you can exile him from the graveyard and return all your creatures in play, or that were put into the graveyard from play that turn to the battlefield. So what you do, as soon as he hits the graveyard, you sacrifice the Loyal Retainers with his trigger on the stack, and it returns him to the battlefield. Then his trigger goes off, and your Loyal Retainers gets returned.
Yep, and then you just repeat that forever, and then if you have a Goblin Bombardment, you just ping everyone and kill them.
Yeah, or Altar of Dementia.
Yeah,
or you can, if you have a Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, you can just make infinite mana and get all your ETBs a million times.
Yeah, yep.
And now that combo has extra redundancy with Hellkite Courser from Commander Legends, which is the 6-mana, 6/5 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, you can put your commander from the command zone into play. Yeah. So that with Gerard will fill a similar role, except for that one, you don't even have to have
him in play.
Gerard in play. You can just have a Sack Outlet, play the Hellkite Courser, and you're good to go.
And the nice thing about this is that Gerard is in your command zone, so you don't have to draw him. It's one less card you have to get. You just need a Sack Outlet and Loyal Retainers, and then Gerard in your command zone.
Yeah, and like we were saying, the Loyal Retainers, Sack Outlets, both usually pretty good on their own.
Yeah. Hellkite Courser is probably a pretty good card on your own, too. But there's a bunch more Boros combos, but we had to kind of stop ourselves to not describe every single combo that exists.
Yeah, those are probably the most viable and a lot of the best ones.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. If you want to do that, you can absolutely do that. I don't know why more people don't. I mean, sure, a couple of them are revolving around combat, so they're maybe a little easier to stop. Like if somebody has a Ghostly Prison or something, you can't win with Kiki Conscripts usually.
You can get rid of a Ghostly Prison. You can
not Conscripts, because Conscripts steals the thing.
Yeah.
But Kiki and Felidar Guardian, you can just usually get rid of something by that point.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, Kiki Jiki probably is going to go in a lot of your Boros decks, and then it's still the amount of you just have to put one other card Restoration Angel in your deck, and it's good. You just have the backdoor combo that you could do if you draw it.
Yeah, I don't love playing a lot of combos. I have the one dedicated combo deck, but even in my Feather deck, those cards were just good anyway. So I'm if I need to win with a combo, I have that option.
You have Zealous Conscripts and Kiki
But
Jiki.
if I'm playing with people who don't like combos, I can just choose not to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. And you don't need to build your deck around it at all. You could just Oh, before we move on, one more thing is Kiki Jiki is a 1-card combo with the Recruiter, which is the red Recruiter, the
Oh yeah, if you play Imperial Recruiter, you get your
Kiki
Felidar Guardian,
yeah.
which then blinks your Recruiter and gets Kiki. It's a very telegraphed combo, and you're not likely to get away with it.
But it's one card to get all of your combo pieces and combo off.
Yeah, so that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to mention, so when people like to talk about the strengths of Boros, there's this like idea that people, they come online and they're like, I've cracked the code. I figured it out. Here's what we should have been doing the whole time. We should just play mass land destruction cards.
Pesky green decks can't play without lands.
Yeah, they're like, green is out of check again. It needs to be stopped. How can we fix this? We should just be playing mass land destruction.
They have a burgeoning in play. How am I going to beat this? I killed their lands. Wait a second. They still have a burgeoning in play.
And every time somebody comes up with this, like you see like the posts on r/EDH, like probably once a month or so. And people are saying at this point, like, we need to stop talking about this because it's such a dead horse. But I actually don't think that mass land destruction is a good or a viable strategy within Boros. But it's also always like said that people just aren't doing it because of the social contract of Commander, where people don't like having their lands blown up. But I would say, like, does the social contract of Commander like really stop people from doing stuff that people don't like that often? Like, you'll see like a Sultai deck like just totally pub stomp on new players, like playing precons and stuff.
Yeah, it happens.
Or you'll see people playing a deck with like 20 counter spells or 25 borderlights. People do a lot of annoying crap. Like,
the social contract doesn't stop them there, but apparently it's supposed to stop them playing mass land destruction? I don't think so.
Yeah, I feel like if mass land destruction was really good in Boros decks, you would see a lot of people playing Boros decks with mass land destruction.
The reason that people don't play mass land destruction is because it's usually not that good. It can be good. Now there are situations where mass land destruction can win you the game, but you kind of have to have a board state situated for that, and when you don't have that, the cards really suck, and you don't play them, and they're like a wasted card in your hand.
Yeah, I actually have seen a decent amount of mass land destruction Commander games, and it's never been from Boros decks. It's been from Gruul decks. I've seen it from Izzet decks in like Joyride of the Gitu, like the Suspend deck. But those are decks where like the Commander either like kind of cheats mana cost, or like you just have more redundancy in your deck to get your lands back into play. Whereas in Boros, like the strategy that people imagine, I think, is like you play this early like aggro game, and then on turn 4 you play an Armageddon and you're just ahead on board, and that allows you to win. Whereas I think like that's such a win more mentality, that like having a card that's like dead 90% of the time, if you're like, because like I feel like against, especially in the early game, like a green deck will have mana dorks, or like people will have mana rocks and stuff. So if you run out your mass land destruction card and they're still able to like stay in the game through those, it really didn't do that much for you.
No, it's, green's like, I guess the only time I could see you trying to like, well, not the only time, but I guess if you're like playing, if you want to like mass land destruction with like a land tax in play, like I guess that's a way you can try to get some advantage over opponents. But I just think you have better things you can be doing, for sure.
Yeah, well, I guess in that situation you would just have to have like.
Oh wait, but you can't even get it unless they play a land.
You wouldn't trigger it. I guess you like sandbag lands. I don't know what the thought is.
You play your mass land destruction, and then nobody play, and you don't play your land on your turn because you're like, well, I hope my opponent draws a land.
Yeah, I think the only idea is that people think, well, the other colors are going to spend the first, especially green decks, are going to spend the first 5 turns just ramping lands into play, doing nothing else. So when you play your mass land destruction card, none of your opponents have anything on board, you do, and you're just going to be able to like clean them up based on that. But I don't think that's very frequently going to be the case.
Yeah, green has cards like Splendid Reclamation and World Shaper, which return all of the lands from their graveyard to the battlefield. Or cards like Life in the Loan, or Ramanap Excavator, or whatever, or Crucible of Worlds. I guess everyone can play that, but Ramanap Excavator.
Yeah.
And they're just able to get their lands back. White can get lands back, but like you need to play like a Sun Titan or like something, and that's if you're destroying all your lands, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, again, I think the strategy is more efficient in like a Gruul deck, where they can Or like even like Lord Windgrace is a pretty good mass land destruction commander in my opinion.
Maybe Narset and Land Master or something.
Yeah, commanders where like they either like get your lands back or like don't need lands to function.
They cast stuff for free. Yeah,
they'll play mass land destruction. There's no social contract stopping them from doing it. It's just because their deck is set up to take advantage of it in a way that wins.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess don't think that if mass land destruction was suddenly okay, that it'll, it's just going to break the format. It's not that good.
Yeah, and people also say that thing of like, well, I could pair it with my Boros Charm and then my lands are indestructible, but like that same argument, like we were saying, a Gruul deck could be like, well, I'll pair my Obliterate with the floating mana I have and just play like Splendid Reclamation afterwards.
They don't do that. They don't do that because it's not very good.
Yeah. It's a 2-card combo where one of your cards doesn't do anything most of the time.
Yeah. And the other card's Boros Charm.
Yeah. So, mass land destruction, not a fan. Maybe there's an argument that, like, if they made a Boros commander that was like, sacrifice me, make all your permanents indestructible until an eternity.
There you go.
Maybe, yeah, you play mass land destruction in that deck.
Sure.
That would make sense, but, that's not where we're at.
And honestly, like, there's I mean, obviously, they don't print mass land destruction these days, but, like, the mass land destruction spells are, like, not very good, honestly. Like, I mean, you have the 2 that are just, like, 4 mana, and then the rest of them, bad. Pretty bad.
You get Armageddon, you get Ravages of War, and then red ones
they're like 6 mana or more.
Are 6+. They also destroy all artifacts and creatures, so, like, in that same mentality of, like, if you're like, I'm ahead on board with creatures, and I go and play... You can't play Yackle Hops. That destroys all artifacts, creatures, and lands in play.
Yeah.
Like, I've thought at points about, like, I have a Gisela kind of enchantment Planeswalker-based deck. I was like, maybe I could play Yackle Hops in this deck, and then it would leave my enchantments and Planeswalkers. But, like, that, again, requires me to be ahead on board.
Yeah.
And, it like, you want a board wipe to help you when you're losing the game, not when you're winning the game.
All right, well, these are a lot of things that, Boros is... doing well, I guess. Not really the
don't do mass land destruction.
Yeah, but all the other things like combat and combos and stuff like that, things that Boros does well. And we've pretty much only been talking about things that Boros does well. So maybe we should talk about a couple weaknesses that Boros does.
So
have.
Aside from ramp and card draw, like what are the things going into 2021 that we think are actual weaknesses of Boros in EDH?
Yeah, one thing is that I find that Boros decks often. You want to play, on average, more lands than other opponents because you kind of really... You have... This is what I was talking about earlier, where with the modal DFCs, and they really, like, increase your range of keepable hands. Boros decks really do need to make sure they have enough lands in their opening hand. Otherwise, you're kind of going to flop and be really bad. So I would say a Boros deck maybe would play 37... maybe 38 lands, whereas, a green or a blue deck might play 36 or 35, something like that.
Right, because like we were talking about, like Boros does have card draw and like card advantage, but like just those general like card draw just spells that do it are really good for hitting your land drops. Yeah. So if you like don't have a land tax or Weather Wayfarer in your hand, you need to be...
hitting your land drops.
You need to make sure you have like at least your first couple land drops, and you need to keep hitting them.
Yeah. The sweet spot for an opening hand with Boros, probably 3 or 4 lands.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
And that's why another reason like why
Farsighted
rummaging and stuff is good too, because like if you have that higher land count, you are able to hit your land drops, but then later in the game if you have rummaging cards, you can just start rummaging away your extra lands when you don't need them.
Yep. So more rummaging cards that are good in Boros would be something I'd be looking forward to. I really like the modal DFCs, so if they make more of those, that'd be cool. Besides the land thing, Boros really doesn't have very good access to free interaction that a lot of other colors have.
Yeah, and by that we mean like spells that you can cast without actually having to spend any mana on.
Yeah. So like for everyone knows that blue has 40 free counter spells.
We got Force of Will, we've got Force of Negation, we've got Fierce Guardianship, we've got Foil, we've got... There's some worse ones. Those are the big offenders.
Commandeer, right? That one's free.
I think that just gains control of us. Doesn't it?
There's a bunch of expensive ones that like require you to like discard 2 cards instead of, and then you get There's a lot of them. But and even like black, you have you have
Snuff Out. You have Deadly Rollick.
Yeah,
as far as like creature removal.
The pacts. You have Pact of Negation in blue and Pact of Slaughter Pact in
black. And you do have pacts in Boros. They just don't do anything.
They just suck.
I think what's the white one? Intervention Pact. It like prevents damage from a source, and you gain that much life.
Red one makes like a giant.
The red one makes a 4/4.
Yeah,
makes a 4/4 token.
But you do have a couple cards in red. Most notably, you have what's the if you have your commander, you get to change the target. Deflecting SWAT is probably the best, if not the only, piece of real like free interaction you have, and that card's pretty good.
You've got Mog Salvage is one.
That's one. That's okay. Yeah.
If you control a mountain and an opponent controls an island, you can destroy target artifact for free. Yeah. So I like that one for killing like an early Soul Ring or Mana Crypt.
For sure.
Outside of those, you've got the Flawless Maneuver is the white one, makes your creatures indestructible until end of turn. Not always the most useful effect. I don't think you could say that's going to come up in necessarily every game.
I think you'd rather be playing Mother of Runes as a protection card, or something like, something 1 mana.
Yeah.
And it'll be about the same.
Well, because even from board wipes, like, indestructible until end of turn isn't going to protect you.
Yeah, for one creature, like, it's not even for everything. Like, I'd rather play it to Fairy's Protection, for sure.
Oh, it actually is your whole creatures.
Oh, it's all of them?
Yeah, it's all your creatures.
I thought it was never mind, my bad. Then.
But still, like, just indestructible until end of turn, like, you're going to get rifted, you're going to get Toxic Deluge.
And if you don't have your commander, it's 3 mana?
Yeah, it's 3 mana. Yeah. Or just indestructible until end of turn.
It's okay, you could play it.
Indestructible, I think, is very overrated nowadays.
Yeah, you could play a more versatile card like Boros Charm.
And then, like, in green doesn't have too many to be fair, but, like, Force of Vigor is a really good one.
Yeah.
Destroying 2 artifacts and enchantments for just exiling green card from
their Summoner's Pact is actually useful.
Oh yeah, the Summoner's Pact, yeah.
Yeah, and you have
not interaction, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, you've got the what's the pump spell for that they gain 4 life, and then
oh yeah, you could use invigorate.
Yeah, but probably not wanting to do that, but so yeah, if they make any cool maybe.
It's mostly a blue thing, I think.
Yeah, I don't mind that Boros doesn't have this, but it feels like black has a lot of really good ones, and green gets a couple good ones too. So,
in my opinion, it's the main thing keeping Boros less competitive than the other colors.
Yeah.
Just the fact that like blue
has that.
It just gets that like I don't know why it's part of the blue color pie of just like you don't spend mana on your spells. Like I don't.
Yeah. I guess we don't really need more free interaction in Boros, but it is one of the weaknesses they have to blue and black. Mostly blue.
Yeah.
So, besides that...
That's what gives me color pie envy.
Exactly. Another thing, Boros doesn't really have the quantity of really good one-card, like, win-the-game effects.
Yeah, like big one-card finishers.
Like, we're thinking, like, Craterhoof Behemoth, or, something that... What's the...
Tooth and Nail.
Tooth and Nail.
Expropriate,
yeah.
Like, sure, you've got, Insurrection, but that's not necessarily always going to win you the game.
Yeah.
Bolas' Citadel is sometimes the next card is a land. Well, here's how it works. When I play Bolas' Citadel, the turn I played a land, my next card's a land. If I'm tricky, I'm going to play this turn 7, so I play 6 mana, and I'm going to wait to play my land, so my top card of my deck's a land card. I'm like, oh, based. I'm going to play the land from my top of my deck. The next card's a land.
When your opponent plays it, they have a Woe Strider, and they get to scry through their entire deck.
Yeah.
Or a Viscera Seer and they win.
Yeah, you can get, like, assuming you haven't taken a lot of damage before that, just play Bolas the Citadel and maybe get, like, 40 mana, or 30 plus mana worth of
crazy
stuff into play, and you're probably going to win off of that.
Yeah, and like I said, with, like, Viscera Seer, if you're playing, like, Aristocrats things, you gain the life off of sacking the things you play, so...
Oh my god. Or Omniscience.
Oh, that card, that wins the game. I mean, there's a lot of cards that just combo with that and win. Like, they're just good cards in your deck. Like, Eternal Witness and, what's the 5-mana counter spell that draws a card and bounces a thing and counter... You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah,
Any of those, counter spells that have different modes on them to draw a card and bounce a thing, that they're just good cards in your decks. Like,
Mystic Confluence.
Yes. There you go. Mystic Confluence and, like, an Eternal Witness, go infinite and draw your deck with Omniscience.
Yeah, my take on Omniscience is if you play Omniscience
you don't need
and nobody interacts with you that turn and you don't win the game, you shouldn't be allowed to play blue anymore. You should have to turn in your card. You should be notify WotC. I hate Omniscience so much.
Yeah, and you got like
fucking dumb.
Rise of the Dark Realms is another, like, it doesn't always win the game right away, but it's a really big impact, single card spell. And I don't think you have many cards other than Insurrection in Boros that do that.
Yeah, I mean, what's the closest thing that white has? Like,
Board
Storm
Wipe?
Herd.
True,
Like a bunch of 1/1s.
But it doesn't even, like, you have to wait a turn, too.
Doesn't even have any cards that just, like, say, like, alternate win conditions, really, in mono white, or, like...
You got the life ones, but that's it, right?
Right, it's Approach of the Second Sun.
Yeah. What's the card where if you have no permanents in play...
Barren Glory.
There you go.
The cheese stands alone.
Yeah, the cheese stands alone. What was that, from an unset?
Yeah.
Yeah. If they make... So you're looking forward, if they make a couple super powerful, like a really good white 10-drop that does really good things at Commander, that'd be awesome.
And I don't even necessarily, like...
We don't need them to make more of it.
I don't love this design of card, but if we're going to talk about, like, weaknesses as opposed to the other colors, that's a thing that you don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my god. Expropriate's so good. But, yeah, so another thing that I guess we should talk about is that Boros does have access to a lot of tutors for very specific things, like equipment, artifacts, small creatures, legendary creatures,
legendary stuff,
planeswalkers, dragons. But
yeah, very specific things. Yeah. I mean, the recruiters are a bit more general. It's just like a power or toughness 2 or less. Yeah, you can get artifacts and the only thing you can really tutor an artifact with is Enlightened Tutor.
Yeah,
I think I've heard people say that before, where they're like, well, white can...
Well,
red can tutor other artifacts.
To the graveyard.
But like in white, like the only thing you can get used to tutor an artifact is Enlightened Tutor.
But all the other colors have really good access to getting most things in their deck. Like blue can get any instant or sorcery from their deck. They have a lot of good creatures that can get, like the trinket mages and stuff. They can get artifacts. They can get artifacts through a lot of their tutors to put them into play even.
Yeah, blue has really good artifact tutors, and artifacts are really good.
Yeah, but being able to get any instant or sorcery that you need from your deck is really good. A lot of great cards, like Spellseeker is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was it? Mystical Tutor, Merchant Scrolls.
Yeah, they typically, like, within, like, blue and green, they don't tutor for everything, but they tutor for, like, the things that your deck is usually, like, built around. In blue, it's artifacts and instants and sorceries. In green, it's lands and creatures. Like, what else do you need in your deck?
Yeah.
It's just, like, it gets everything you really need.
Yeah.
Like, sure, you can't maybe make, like, a mono-green Enchantress deck and have a tutor for an enchantment.
Yeah. So, I mean, the white and red do have access to tutors, but, we could do for a couple more, I think. Be nice.
Yeah, more of those creatures that ETB and get you a tutor.
Yeah, those cards are always really good. Yeah.
More redundancy of that.
Yeah.
All right, the biggest weakness we think maybe of Boros, Spencer.
It's that, oftentimes when you're playing a Boros deck, like, just think about how the game's going to go. You're going to be playing a creature on curve, maybe you're going to be, playing some things, maybe a little bit of mana rocks, maybe some dudes. It's all really threatening and telegraphed whenever you have something going on. So, like, your opponents are going to be like, hey, I'm going to take 30 if I don't do something about you right now, so I'm going to do something about you right now. So... the telegraphing of all your stuff really sucks. And a lot of times in Boros, you have to kind of tap out, or maybe not even tap out, but you have to play things and wait a turn cycle to get, like, the full value out of it. Like, Sun Titan has to attack, kind of, to be really good. Or, like, creatures, yeah.
That's part of the reason why we were saying Haste is such an important thing in Boros.
Yeah.
But, like, other decks, like, can oftentimes just sandbag a bunch of cards in their hand, just hit their land drops, have no board presence, and like we were saying with these single card win conditions, they can just win, like, off of no board.
Yeah.
You almost can never do that in Boros unless, like, you're holding back, like, a few combo pieces and you have just tons of mana.
Like we were talking about earlier, Boros is really good at capitalizing on creatures in play to deal, like, large amounts of damage or get really good effects. The problem with that is you have creatures in play and your opponents are threatened by your creatures in play.
Yeah, and we don't love the dies to removal argument, but creatures are arguably the most fragile card type.
Yep.
They're perhaps also, in my opinion, the most useful card type, but every deck should be able to answer creatures. So typically, people are going to be able to interact with you. And you just need to be a lot more conservative with running out your threats, I think, in Boros.
Yep. So just recognize that, oftentimes, you might, when you're playing against a Boros opponent, maybe the blue player that's not playing too much is a little threatening. Maybe hit them.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're the, it's easy to get get too spooked. Like if they're going hard on one, and like typically they will be going at one person at a time if they're an aggro deck, and you might think, well, I need to deal with them now. But maybe if they're not attacking you, you could just like sit back with your removal, like just wait until they've dealt with one of your opponents.
Oftentimes in Boros, you're playing kind of open-handed, meaning that people you may have some tricks, but people know what you're doing and they can see what you're doing. This is why, like we were talking about earlier, that haste is really good, and you should probably put at least a couple cards that give haste, even if it's just Lightning Greaves and like a land that does it. Having that ability to come out of nowhere after a board wipe or something and just finish someone off or threaten them is really powerful.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that's about all we have for this episode. There were a lot of things we were going to talk about, but we cut it short.
We've got a ton of things to say about it, and we probably forgot a bunch of stuff and missed a bunch of things, but I think we kind of covered why we don't think it's necessarily that weak, especially nowadays.
And I just forgive me for a moment. I still see, even in 2020, people making jokes about, oh, I'm playing white in my deck, so I have to make use of every card I have. I don't have access to the card draw that other colors have, and it's
it's a dead meme. Like people saying like, oh, Boros is trash, or like it's not viable, or like I'm bringing my water pistol to the gunfight. Like it's just not true.
Maybe a couple years ago, but these days, I think Boros can hold its own pretty well.
Even this last year, like going over the review of 2020, we've gotten so many sick Boros cards. We've gotten powerful commanders. Like I could argue that maybe that was another weakness of Boros, that we didn't have very many powerful like value engine or like card advantage producing commanders. But this year we got Winota.
Oh yeah,
we're not huge fans of Winota, but you can't argue that she's not a powerful commander.
Yeah,
it's a very powerful effect.
Even in Commander Legends, you have cards like Arden. Arden's awesome.
Yeah, just giving you like pretty much free equips, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, all of even like Rogue Rack. I think what Jessica's really cool. I don't think I haven't played her yet, but she's
sick.
She's awesome.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And we got like in more combo commanders in the form of Zerta the Dawnwaker.
Yeah, it's cool.
Pretty strong deck as far as I've seen.
Yeah, but so yeah, I guess just to put a cap on it, like pretty happy with Boros, honestly. It's a lot of fun to play, and if you're kind of been scared of playing Boros because you think it's like really underpowered or whatever, I would recommend you give it a try. And some things to be said. You might have to think. You might have to be like a little bit more disciplined in your deck building. You might not be able to play as many for fun cards. But I mean, I don't know. I like playing good cards. How about you?
I think just lower your mana curve generally, increase your overall card quality, and you can make a really efficient and you can make a fun Boros deck.
Super synergistic. All the cards have synergy with each other. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, this is just something that we want to talk about. It's really important to me. I've been playing Boros Commander since I started. I think my first Commander deck, I picked up a Jorkadine because it was in the cheap binder at the card store, and I made a Boros equipment deck and Metalcraft, and it was a terrible deck. This was probably like, God, I can't even remember how many years ago.
2011, 2010?
At least like 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, that long? Dang.
But I started playing that, and then around the time, like I started getting into like Commander like content, and I started listening, and everyone's like, Boros is so crap, and my deck was kind of crap, but I didn't feel like it was worse than other decks, and I kept playing and making more Boros decks, and the more I've played it, I have I think I have 5 paper Boros decks and 2 on Magic Online now, and it's my favorite color combination. I think it's a lot of fun, and it's not as bad as everyone says it is.
I agree.
I don't think people should be discouraged from playing the colors that they want to play in Commander, and I hope that everyone's able to take this information and make a fun Boros deck.
Yeah,
have a good time with it.
Try not to shame people for playing Boros, or whatever color they play for that matter, except for dirty bug players.
Yeah, if you main Simic and Sultai all the time and act like you're like the top of the intellectual food chain.
Push up your glasses. I've come up with something very.
Yes, see, I have broken the format. I am a genius. Just stop.
Just kidding, of
But-
course. You can play your colors
Yeah,
and stuff and
do
be happy
whatever,
about
do
it.
whatever you want. Just don't act like you're like some genius for saying, "Oh, Boros is trash." Like, yeah,
That's all. We're just
It's
biting back
not
a little bit.
not a very original opinion in
All right.
my take.
All right. Well, thanks for
But
watching.
this
guys.
has been
Yeah.
the first episode of EDH Takes, and thank you guys for listening. And hopefully we'll be back with another fun subject within the year.